If your business isn't hitting that critical 10% growth mark right now, you might actually be falling into a massive trap. Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're diving into the wild, rapidly changing landscape of the fast-moving consumer goods market. We're looking at a massive shift that is literally rewriting the rules of retail as we know them. The middle ground, it's completely disappearing. So if you're operating a brand that isn't sitting at the absolute top of the food chain, or if you're a retailer trying to maximize your shelf profitability, this dynamic is changing absolutely everything about how you do business.
To understand where the market is heading, we've got to look at where the wealth is concentrated right now. Based on the latest Kantar BrandZ 2026 data, the top 20 global food and beverage brands hold a staggering combined value of $309 billion. It's incredibly top-heavy. I mean, just look at Coca-Cola. They single-handedly claim $113 billion of that pie. That is over 36% of the entire top 20 total value, held by just one single company. Crazy, right?
Here is exactly how we're going to break this down today. First, the billion-dollar brand divide. Second, the rise of the dual shopper. Third, why price wars fail. And finally, we'll map out the survival strategies for both retailers and FMCG brands.
All right, Section 1, the billion-dollar brand divide. Let's see who is actually dominating the very top of this market.
So right behind Coca-Cola, a massive gap just completely opens up. We see highly recognizable names, for sure, but it's significantly lower valuations. You've got Red Bull sitting at number 2 with just over $24 billion, Nongfu Spring at $20 billion, and Pepsi at $16 billion. The wealth drops off pretty quickly after the top spot, but make no mistake, these top 20 names are fiercely defending their territory.
When we really analyze this list, these top-tier winners fall into three distinct groups. First, you've got the unreplaceable beverage giants. Think Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Fanta, Sprite. Second, the high-margin functional energy and coffee brands like Red Bull, Monster, Nespresso, and Nescafé. And third, the regional and impulse powerhouses, which encompasses Asian leaders like Yili alongside global snack titans like Lay's, Lindt, and Doritos. Why are they so dominant? Well, because they own deeply ingrained habits, they offer highly specific functional benefits, or they just deliver unique taste profiles that consumers absolutely refuse to compromise on. Think about it. You don't substitute a Red Bull with a generic budget alternative on your morning commute without noticing a huge difference.
But if consumers are so fiercely loyal to those top brands, what happens to the rest of the shelf? That brings us to Section 2, the rise of the dual shopper.
Here's the thing. Brand loyalty isn't dead. It's just completely polarized. Average brands with weak differentiation are getting squeezed right out. And why is that? Because today's consumer acts as what we call a dual shopper. Due to this behavioral shift, standard middle-tier national brands are currently bleeding about 2 to 4% of their volume share every single year to store brands in major European markets. Now, if you're an FMCG leader tasked with driving that critical 10% growth right now, a 4% annual leak literally makes your job mathematically impossible, unless you radically change your strategy.
Let's peek inside a modern shopping cart for a second. Today's buyer will grab a premium $12.2 billion brand like Monster Energy and just drop into their cart without a second thought. Or maybe an espresso product valued at over $10 billion. But then they roll into the very next aisle and instantly switch to budget generic pasta, basic canned beans, and generic paper towels. They are literally penny pinching on the basics just to fund their premium splurges. Shoppers have essentially stopped paying extra for middle-grade products. And retailers? Oh, they actively recognize this shift. They aggressively improve the quality of their generic products, and as a result, they've captured a massive chunk of market share. To put that into perspective, this strategic move has pushed the total annual European private label market value to a colossal 387 billion euros. In Switzerland alone, private labels now hold over 52% of the entire market share. That's huge. So, how are those squeezed middle-tier brands fighting back? Let's move to Section 3, why price wars fail.
When sales volume starts to drop, FMCG leaders have a tendency to panic. Their immediate knee-jerk reaction is often to protect their volume by chasing short-term sales targets using deep trade discounts and temporary price cuts. But why is this such a fatal strategic error? Well, if you have a mid-tier brand, trying to win a price war against a major retailer is, quite frankly, structurally impossible.
You just cannot win this war, and there are three distinct reasons why. First, shelf control. I mean, who do you think actually decides what goes at eye level or what gets shoved down to the bottom shelf? The retailer does. Second, zero marketing overhead.
Private labels don't pay for heavy, global advertising campaigns. The physical shelf itself is their ad. This means their cost structure is automatically, fundamentally lower. And third, consumer habits. If you frequently discount your price, you're literally teaching consumers to only buy your product when it's on sale. You're destroying your brand equity and turning your product into nothing more than a cheap commodity.
The power clearly sits with the retailers here. Which brings us to Section 4, Strategy for Retailers.
For retailers to actually build long-term category profitability, they have to focus on operational efficiency. Step 1. Retailers need to stop mimicking national brands with expensive TV, billboard, or digital ads for their store brands. It completely destroys their margin advantage. Step 2. Take that capital and pour it directly into product formulation. A private label absolutely must match or even beat the national brand standard in double-blind taste tests. Once that quality is secure, boom, you put it on the top shelf. And step 3, establish a tiered structure for those private labels.
Because relying on a single budget label actually limits profit margins. The smartest retailers out there use a three-tiered approach. First, you have the entry or economy tier at the lowest possible price point, designed specifically to block out hard discounters. Then the core tier, which is a direct functional equivalent to national brands but sits about 20% to 30% cheaper. And finally, the premium tier. These are your high-margin, organic, regional, or specialty store brands that compete directly with mid-tier national brands on quality, not just price. This whole structure allows retailers to completely surround the remaining middle-tier national brands, effectively capturing that vital 10% growth that those national brands are desperately losing.
Okay, let's flip the perspective now. Section 5. Strategy for FMCG brands. Defending your market share and getting your business back on track for that 10% growth target requires some incredibly practical shifts in strategy. First, end those margin-draining short-term price promotions right away. They just don't create long-term loyalty. Second, you've got to invest heavily in product distinctiveness. If your product tastes, looks, and functions exactly like a store brand, well, it's a commodity. You need proprietary packaging, highly specific functional benefits, or specialized formulations that private labels just can't quickly duplicate. And third, you must rigorously monitor your price gap.
This price gap matrix? This is basically your ultimate survival guide. You have to regularly assess the price difference between your product and the store brand. If your brand is less than 20% more expensive than the equivalent store brand, great. You can still fight. You defend your position using crystal clear benefit communication and fresh packaging. But if you are over 30% more expensive and you don't have any truly unique features, you've got to face reality. The brand will inevitably lose volume. In this scenario, you're looking at two really tough options. Either switch your capacity to do contract manufacturing for the retailer's private label, or just exit the category entirely to protect your capital.
The data here couldn't be clearer. The food and beverage market has violently split into high-value top brands on one side and highly efficient store private labels on the other. That middle ground, it is disappearing right before our eyes. In a market where standing still literally means losing 4% a year, finding your path to 10% growth isn't just some nice corporate target, it is an absolute matter of survival. So, looking at your categories for this year, will you find a way to become irreplaceable, or will you be squeezed off the shelf entirely? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.